Sometimes a single message can travel thousands of miles and shatter everything you thought you knew about the world. In an age where information moves at the speed of light, where social media algorithms decide what billions see and hear, one video call between two men from completely different worlds would expose truths so profound that the very foundations of global power would tremble. What you're about to witness isn't just entertainment. It's a moment when authentic leadership met manufactured celebrity, when real revolution encountered corporate-sponsored inspiration, when the raw truth of Africa's struggle collided with America's carefully curated success stories. The date was set like any other taping day. Studio lights blazed with their familiar warmth, casting that golden glow that had become synonymous with hope and second chances. The Family Feud set stood ready, its iconic podium gleaming under the hot lights, waiting for another day of laughter, surprises, and heartwarming moments that would make their way into living rooms across America. This was Steve Harvey's domain, a space where he had mastered the art of turning ordinary families into television gold, where his quick wit and genuine warmth had built an empire of goodwill and entertainment. Steve Harvey, the man who had transformed himself from homeless comedian to multimedia mogul, stood in his element. His tailored suit was pressed to perfection, his mustache impeccably groomed, his smile ready to light up millions of screens. This was the Steve Harvey that America had come to love. The man who could make you laugh until your sides hurt, then move you to tears with a story of perseverance and faith. He had conquered every medium: stand-up comedy, radio, television, books, motivational speaking. His rags-to-riches story had become the stuff of legend, inspiring countless others to chase their dreams despite the odds. For years, Harvey had been more than just an entertainer. He had become a cultural ambassador, a bridge between communities, a voice that could speak to the struggles of everyday people while celebrating their triumphs. His morning radio show reached millions, his television programs dominated ratings, and his motivational speeches filled arenas with people hungry for his particular brand of tough love wisdom mixed with spiritual guidance. He was the king of his domain, comfortable in his success, secure in his message of hard work, faith, and the American dream. But on this particular day, something was different. The usual pre-show energy carried an undercurrent of anticipation that even the veteran production crew couldn't quite place. Technical teams were making final adjustments to equipment that would connect this Atlanta studio to a location thousands of miles away, across an ocean, in a land that most Americans knew only through headlines about conflict, poverty, and struggle. The satellite connection had been tested and retested, because today's guest wouldn't be walking through the studio doors or sitting in the green room making small talk about the weather. Halfway around the world, in the heart of West Africa, Ibrahim Traoré was preparing for a conversation that would reach far beyond the borders of his homeland. At 34 years old, this wasn't just any political figure or celebrity seeking American media attention. This was a man who had literally fought his way to power, not through campaign donations or political maneuvering, but through revolution, real revolution, with real bullets and real consequences. As the president of Burkina Faso, Traoré represented something that had become increasingly rare in modern politics, a leader who had seized power not for personal gain, but to liberate his people from the strangling grip of foreign exploitation. Traoré's story was written in the dust of African soil and the sweat of genuine struggle. A former geology student turned revolutionary, he had watched his country and continent bleed resources while their people remained trapped in poverty. He had seen the endless cycle of Western aid that somehow never seemed to aid anyone except the donors, witnessed the puppet governments that danced to foreign tunes while their own people suffered. When peaceful protest failed, when diplomatic channels led nowhere, when the very institutions meant to serve the people instead served foreign masters, Traoré and his fellow revolutionaries chose the path that history's most celebrated freedom fighters had walked before them. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. On one side, Steve Harvey, the embodiment of individual success within the American system, a man who had played by the rules and won big, whose message centered on personal responsibility and working within existing structures to achieve greatness. On the other side, Ibrahim Traoré, a revolutionary who had concluded that some systems were so fundamentally corrupt that they couldn't be reformed, only replaced, a leader who had literally taken up arms against the established order to free his people from what he saw as modern colonialism. Neither man knew that they were about to engage in more than just an interview. They were about to participate in a collision of worldviews, a conversation that would expose the fault lines between two completely different understandings of success, freedom, and what it truly means to lift up your people. The studio lights were ready, the cameras were rolling, and across the ocean, two men prepared to have a conversation that would leave both of them, and everyone watching, fundamentally changed. The satellite connection crackled to life, and suddenly the familiar rhythm of Steve Harvey's show was interrupted by something no one in that Atlanta studio had ever experienced. The large monitor flickered, pixels dancing momentarily before resolving into the image of a young African president sitting in what appeared to be a modest office, worlds away from the glitz and glamour of American television. Production assistants exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the usual celebrity guest walking onto the Family Feud set with rehearsed anecdotes and promotional talking points. Steve Harvey, master of controlling any room he entered, found himself in uncharted territory. His practiced smile wavered slightly as he leaned forward, trying to process what was happening. The usual banter, the easy jokes, the comfortable dynamic he had perfected over decades, none of it seemed appropriate for this moment. Something in President Traoré's eyes, even through the pixelated video connection, carried a weight that immediately shifted the entire energy of the room. Then Ibrahim Traoré began to speak, and his words cut through the studio like a blade through silk. His voice carried the quiet intensity of a man who had seen his people suffer and had decided to do something about it, regardless of the cost. There was no political polish, no media training, no careful parsing of words for maximum palatability. This was raw truth delivered with the force of absolute conviction. "Brother Steve," Traoré began, and immediately everyone in the studio felt the difference. This wasn't the language of celebrity interviews or promotional appearances. This was one human being reaching across an ocean to touch another human being's soul. "I speak to you not as a president to an entertainer, but as an African man to a son of Africa who has found success in a foreign land." The camera operators noticed at first the way Steve's posture changed, the subtle shift from performer to listener. His hands, usually animated and expressive, grew still. His eyes, typically scanning the room to gauge audience reaction, fixed solely on the monitor. Traoré continued, his words building like a gathering storm. "You speak of dreams and hard work, and I honor the journey. But I must tell you about dreams deferred, about hard work that enriches others while our children starve. I must tell you about the heart of the sun that burns within every African soul, a fire that cannot be extinguished by centuries of exploitation." That phrase, "the heart of the sun," landed in the studio like a thunderclap. Several crew members stopped what they were doing, drawn by something in the president's voice that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. Steve's breathing became visibly deeper, his chest rising and falling as if he were trying to process not just words, but the raw emotion behind them. "You have achieved great success in America," Traoré pressed on, his voice rising with passion. "But success built on a system that continues to drain the life from Africa is success built on our children's graves. Every diamond in their jewelry, every mineral in their phones, every resource that powers their luxury, it comes from our soil, extracted by our hands, sold for pennies while they profit in billions." The studio had gone completely silent. Even the usually bustling production area seemed frozen as Traoré's words reverberated through the space. Steve's eyes began to glisten, his famous composure cracking like a dam under tremendous pressure. "I am not asking you to abandon your success," the president continued, his voice now carrying the weight of generations. I am asking you to remember where your ancestors' bones rest, to remember that your success means nothing if your motherland continues to bleed. The heart of the sun burns in you, brother. I can see it even through this screen. But that fire was meant for more than entertainment. It was meant for liberation. That's when it happened. Steve Harvey, the man who had made millions laugh, who had built an empire on his ability to remain unshakable, began to break. His shoulders started to tremble first, then his hands. The tears came slowly at first, then faster, as if a lifetime of carefully constructed walls were suddenly crumbling. The crew watched in stunned silence as one of America's most recognizable entertainers wept openly, not from sadness, but from recognition, the recognition of a truth he had perhaps always known but never allowed himself to fully feel. Production assistants looked at each other uncertainly. Should they cut to commercial? Should they stop recording? But somehow, everyone in that room understood that they were witnessing something sacred, something that couldn't be paused or edited or packaged for easy consumption. They were watching a moment of absolute human truth unfold in real time. What happened in that Atlanta studio transcended the usual boundaries of entertainment television. This wasn't another viral moment destined for social media clips and reaction videos. This was something far more profound, a collision between two different definitions of success that exposed the fundamental questions plaguing our modern world. When Ibrahim Traoré spoke of the heart of the sun, he wasn't just using poetic language. He was identifying something that Western culture has systematically tried to extinguish in its pursuit of individual achievement. Steve Harvey's breakdown represented more than personal emotion. It was the moment when a man who had spent decades teaching others to climb the ladder of success suddenly questioned whether that ladder was leaning against the right wall. His tears weren't just for himself, but for every person who had ever achieved material success while carrying the unspoken weight of leaving their community behind. In that moment, Harvey embodied the internal conflict of an entire generation of successful African Americans who had made it in America while their ancestral homeland continued to suffer under systems of exploitation that their very success inadvertently supported. The power of this exchange lay in its exposure of a truth that both men had always known but never articulated, that individual success in an unjust system can become a form of complicity if it's not paired with a commitment to changing that system. Traoré's revolution wasn't just about politics or economics, it was about reclaiming the right to define success on African terms, to prioritize collective liberation over individual achievement. And Steve, despite all his accomplishments, recognized in that moment that his platform could be a bridge rather than just a stage. This was leadership meeting leadership, but in two completely different forms. Steve had led through inspiration, showing people how to succeed within existing structures. Traoré led through transformation, refusing to accept those structures as permanent. Both approaches required courage, but only one demanded the willingness to risk everything for principles. The conversation revealed that true leadership isn't just about motivating people to climb higher. Sometimes it's about questioning why the mountain exists in the first place. The human connection transcended race, nationality, and circumstance because both men understood what it meant to carry the hopes of their people. Steve had done it through entertainment and motivation, becoming a symbol of what was possible. Traoré was doing it through revolution, becoming a symbol of what was necessary. Their exchange proved that authentic connection happens not when we hide our struggles, but when we expose them with unflinching honesty. Just as the studio was beginning to process what had happened, something unexpected occurred. The satellite connection, which everyone assumed would end with Traoré's message, remained active. Through the crackling audio, they heard the president's voice again, but this time it carried a different quality, more personal, almost hesitant. "Brother Steve," Traoré said, "if you have a moment more, there is something I must tell you, something I have never shared publicly." Steve, still wiping tears from his eyes, managed to compose himself enough to respond. "Of course, Mr. President. I'm listening." What came next would transform this entire exchange from a powerful political statement into something deeply, achingly personal. Traoré's voice grew softer, carrying the weight of memory and childhood dreams. "When I was a boy in Burkina Faso, maybe 8 or 9 years old, We had no electricity most days, no running water, certainly no television. But sometimes, on special occasions, we would gather at a neighbor's house who had a small generator and an old television. And sometimes, if we were very lucky, we would see American programs. The studio held its breath. This wasn't the revolutionary president speaking anymore. This was a child's memory being shared across an ocean. One day, I saw you for the first time. You were doing stand-up comedy, and even though I barely understood English then, something about your presence, your energy, the way you commanded that stage, it made me believe that someone who looked like me, someone from nothing, could stand in front of the world and make them listen. Steve's composure, barely recovered, began to crack again. His hand moved to cover his mouth as the weight of what he was hearing settled over him. Traoré continued, his voice now carrying the warmth of genuine gratitude mixed with profound sadness. I watched every video of yours I could find as I grew older. Your motivational speeches, your morning show, your stories about being homeless and fighting your way up, they gave me hope during the darkest times. When I was studying geology and seeing our country's resources stolen, when I was planning the revolution and wondered if we could really change anything, I would remember Steve Harvey saying that God had a plan, that persistence and faith could overcome any obstacle. The irony was devastating and beautiful simultaneously. A future revolutionary leader had been inspired by an American entertainer's message of hope and perseverance. The child who would grow up to challenge Western exploitation had once found comfort in the success story of a Western celebrity. And now that same celebrity was weeping at the realization that his inspirational messages had helped forge the very revolutionary who was calling him to account. So you see, brother, Traoré concluded, this is not just a political message I am sending you. This is a son telling his father that the lessons were learned, but that the fight is bigger than we both imagined. You taught me to dream big. Now I am asking you to dream with me about what real liberation looks like. The silence that followed stretched across continents. In that Atlanta studio, Steve Harvey sat with his head in his hands, processing words that had just rewritten his understanding of his own life's work. Then, through the crackling connection, came the invitation that would change everything. Brother Steve, Traoré's voice carried a new quality now, not the formal tone of a president addressing a celebrity, but the warmth of family calling family home. I know this is much to ask, and I know your life is full of commitments and responsibilities. But I must extend to you an invitation from the heart. Come to Burkina Faso. Come and see what your inspiration helped create. Come and stand where your ancestors' strength runs through the soil. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a diplomatic photo opportunity. Every person in that studio could feel the weight of genuine brotherhood in those words. Traoré wasn't inviting Steve Harvey the brand or Steve Harvey the celebrity. He was calling to Steve Harvey the man, the descendant of Africa who had found success in foreign lands but had never forgotten where his people's journey began. Come not as a guest, but as a son returning home, the president continued. Come and see what revolution really looks like when it serves the people instead of serving power. Come and help us dream bigger than either of us imagined possible. The invitation hung in the air like a challenge and a promise simultaneously. This wasn't about adding another exotic destination to a celebrity travel itinerary. This was about answering a call that reached back through generations, about honoring the connection between a successful man and the revolutionary he had unknowingly helped inspire. It was about brotherhood that transcended borders, success that transcended individual achievement, and purpose that transcended entertainment. The days following that extraordinary studio moment were unlike anything Steve Harvey had ever experienced. For a man accustomed to making quick decisions about million-dollar deals and career moves, this invitation created a kind of paralysis he hadn't felt since his homeless days, when every choice carried life-altering consequences. His advisors, predictably, were unanimous in their concern. The insurance complications alone were staggering. Burkina Faso wasn't exactly on the standard celebrity travel circuit. The security briefings painted pictures of political instability, the kind of environments that entertainment lawyers have nightmares about. His business managers ran calculations about lost revenue from postponed appearances, canceled tapings, and the ripple effects of stepping away from his carefully orchestrated empire. But late at night, in the quiet of his mansion, Steve found himself returning again and again to Traoré's words. "You taught me to dream big. Now I am asking you to dream with me." How do you ignore a call like that? How do you dismiss the revelation that your life's work had helped forge a revolutionary leader who was now fighting for the very principles you claim to believe in? The turning point came during one of his morning prayers, a ritual that had anchored him through every major decision of his adult life. As he sat in his private study, surrounded by awards and accolades and photographs documenting his rise from nothing to everything, a simple question crystallized in his mind. What was the point of all this success if it couldn't be used to answer a call this profound? The decision, when it finally came, felt less like choosing and more like surrendering to something that had already been decided by forces larger than career considerations or risk assessments. Steve Harvey, the man who had built an empire on motivating others to chase their dreams, realized that he was being called to chase something bigger than any dream he had ever articulated. He was being called to discover what his success actually meant when measured against the struggles of his ancestral homeland. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. Steve Harvey was accustomed to arrivals that looked like small military operations, private jets met by motorcades, red carpets rolled out at premieres, security details managing crowds of screaming fans. His usual celebrity entrance involved controlled chaos, carefully orchestrated to maximize impact and minimize risk. But his arrival at Ouagadougou Airport was different from anything he had ever experienced. No paparazzi flash cameras. No entertainment reporters thrust microphones toward his face. Instead, there was something far more powerful waiting for him: authenticity. President Traoré himself stood on the tarmac, not surrounded by the usual presidential pomp and circumstance, but accompanied by a small group of what appeared to be ordinary citizens. No military honor guard, no elaborate ceremony, just a young revolutionary leader waiting to welcome someone he considered family. The simplicity was more moving than any red carpet reception Steve had ever received. As Steve descended the aircraft steps, the African sun hit him with an intensity that seemed to carry meaning beyond temperature. This was the sun that had beat down on his ancestors, the same light that had witnessed centuries of struggle and survival. The air itself felt different, thinner perhaps, but somehow more substantial, as if it carried the weight of history and the promise of change. Traoré stepped forward with arms extended, and when the two men embraced, it was clear that something profound was happening. This wasn't a political photo opportunity or a celebrity meet and greet. This was a homecoming of sorts, a moment when success achieved in foreign lands met struggle endured on native soil. The embrace lasted longer than protocol would typically allow, as if both men were acknowledging the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The small crowd that had gathered began to sing, not a national anthem or official welcome song, but something that sounded ancient and hopeful simultaneously. Steve, still processing the emotional weight of actually being here, found himself moved once again to tears. But these weren't the tears of breakdown he had shed in that Atlanta studio. These were tears of recognition, of coming face to face with something he had been searching for his entire life without even knowing it. "Welcome home, brother," Traoré said simply, and those 3 words carried more weight than any elaborate welcome ceremony could have managed. This wasn't about celebrity treatment or VIP accommodations. This was about family acknowledging family, about success meeting purpose, about individual achievement being called to serve something larger than itself. As they walked together toward a modest convoy of vehicles, no limousines, no flashy displays of wealth, Steve realized that he was experiencing something entirely new. For perhaps the first time in decades, he was being welcomed not for what he had accomplished or what he could provide, but simply for who he was and where he had come from. It was the most genuine reception of his entire career, and it was happening in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map. The next morning brought an encounter that would redefine everything Steve thought he understood about influence and impact. President Traoré had arranged for him to visit a local school, not for a publicity event or photo opportunity, but for something far more meaningful. As they walked through the dusty courtyard toward a simple concrete building, Steve could hear the excited voices of children inside, their laughter carrying the universal sound of youth and possibility. What happened next would haunt and inspire him for the rest of his life. The children, maybe 30 of them, ranging from 8 to 16 years old, had prepared something special. Not a performance for the visiting celebrity, but a testament to the power of words traveling across oceans and taking root in the most unexpected soil. A young girl named A.C. Che, no more than 12 years old, stepped forward with a carefully folded piece of paper in her hands. Her English was careful but clear, each word chosen with the precision that comes from having something important to say. "Mr. Steve," she began, her voice carrying a confidence that belied her age, "we want to thank you for teaching us that our dreams are not too big for our circumstances." She unfolded the paper, a letter written in careful handwriting, decorated with small drawings of stars and suns around the margins. As she began to read, Steve felt the familiar tightness in his chest that had become his body's response to profound emotional truth. "Dear Mr. Steve Harvey," A.C. Che read, "My name is A.C. Che, and I am 12 years old. I live in Burkina Faso, where sometimes we don't have electricity and sometimes we don't have enough food. But we have your videos that our teacher shows us on her phone when she has battery. You said that God has a plan for everyone, even little girls in small villages that nobody knows about. You said that being poor now doesn't mean being poor forever. You said that dreams are the seeds of change." The other children gathered closer, their faces reflecting the same mixture of hope and determination that Steve recognized from his own childhood. These weren't just kids who had watched his videos. These were young people who had absorbed his message so completely that it had become part of their own identity. "We wanted you to know," A.C. Che continued, "that your words helped us survive the hardest times. When the old government didn't care about us, and when people said we would never matter, we remembered you saying that we matter to God. When President Traoré took power and said we could build a better country, we believed him because you taught us to believe in ourselves first." Steve found himself struggling to maintain composure as the full impact of his life's work revealed itself in the faces of these children. All those years of motivational speaking, all those morning radio shows dispensing advice to callers, all those comedy specials and television appearances. He had always assumed their primary value was entertainment and inspiration for American audiences. He had never imagined that his words would travel thousands of miles and take root in the hearts of children who faced challenges he could barely comprehend. The letter concluded with words that would echo in Steve's mind for years to come. "Thank you for planting seeds in our hearts before we even knew we needed them. Now we are growing, and when we are big, we will plant seeds too. The heart of the sun that President Traoré talks about, we learned about that from you, even though you called it by a different name. You called it purpose." That evening, as Steve sat alone in his simple guest quarters, he found himself thinking not about the empire he had built in America, but about the seeds he had apparently been planting without even knowing it. The conversation with President Traoré had shattered his assumptions about success, but meeting those children had rebuilt them into something entirely new. For decades, he had measured his impact by ratings and revenue, by sold-out arenas and best-selling books. But sitting in that quiet room in Burkina Faso, he realized that his true legacy wasn't being written in Hollywood boardrooms or Atlanta studios. It was being written in the hearts and minds of people he would never meet, in languages he didn't speak, in circumstances he had never imagined. The simple message he had been sharing for years, that everyone has purpose, that dreams are valid regardless of circumstances, that persistence and faith can overcome any obstacle, had traveled across oceans and taken root in exactly the places where it was needed most. A young revolutionary leader had found strength in those words during his darkest planning moments. Children facing poverty and uncertainty had found hope. And now, Steve himself had found something he hadn't even realized he was searching for, proof that his life's work mattered in ways that transcended entertainment and touched the realm of human transformation. As he prepared to return to America, Steve Harvey understood that he was not the same man who had boarded that plane in Atlanta. He had come to Burkina Faso thinking he was answering an invitation, but he realized now that he had actually been receiving an education about the true meaning of influence, about the responsibility that comes with having a platform, and about the reality that in our interconnected world, every word we speak has the potential to travel farther and plant deeper than we ever imagined. The story that began with a simple message crossing oceans had revealed a profound truth. We are all connected by invisible threads of influence and inspiration. Every person who has ever achieved any measure of success, any platform, any voice that others listen to, carries the responsibility and the opportunity to plant seeds of hope in soil they may never see. The heart of the sun burns in all of us, waiting to be awakened by the right words at the right moment. Sometimes those words come from unexpected sources, travel impossible distances, and take root in the most unlikely ground. But when they do, they have the power to change not just individual lives, but entire nations. The question isn't whether your words matter. It's whether you're brave enough to speak them with the knowledge that they might travel farther than you ever dreamed possible.